The first transmission arrived on a Tuesday. Commander Sarah Chen was reviewing supply manifests in her cramped office aboard the orbital defense station Aegis Prime when the communication array lit up with an emergency signal. The frequency was wrong, too high, modulated in patterns that made her teeth ache, but the translation matrix worked, and what came through the speakers changed everything humanity thought it knew about its place in the universe. "Attention, primitive species of Sol 3. The voice crackled with electronic distortion and something else. Something that sounded almost like hunger. "You have been selected for harvesting. Your biological distinctiveness will be analyzed. Your technological distinctiveness will be catalogued. Your resistance is noted and will be overcome. We are the Vorthak. Compliance will reduce unnecessary suffering." The signal cut to static, leaving Chen staring at the communication panel with the same expression she might have worn if her morning coffee had suddenly begun speaking Latin. Around her, the bridge crew exchanged glances that carried the weight of a species suddenly aware it was no longer alone in a universe it had assumed was either empty or safely distant. Admiral Marcus Rodriguez was pulled from his daughter's birthday party to analyze the signal. Yuki Tanaka abandoned her research on quantum consciousness to head the xenolinguistics team. Captain James McCready left his retirement in Montana to return to active duty. None of them knew they were about to witness humanity's greatest test and its most defining moment. The second transmission came 6 hours later, accompanied by something that made every astronomical sensor in the solar system scream warnings into the void. Ships. Massive angular vessels that looked like someone had taken the concept of aggression and forged it in steel and plasma. They moved with the casual confidence of apex predators, their hulls scarred with what appeared to be trophies from previous conquests. Intelligence analysts worked through the night, cataloguing what they could observe. The Vorthak fleet numbered in the thousands, dreadnoughts the size of small moons, escort vessels that dwarfed Earth's largest carriers, and something else, smaller craft that moved with an organic fluidity, as if the ships themselves were alive, or had once been. Dr. Tees, Elena Vasquez, head of Earth's Deep Space Monitoring Network, delivered her report to the emergency session of the United Earth Defense Council with the clinical detachment that comes from shock. Based on observed mass displacement and energy signatures, we estimate their smallest vessel could sterilize a continent. Their largest, she paused, consulting her notes with hands that trembled slightly. Their largest could crack a planet. The room fell silent. Then someone, later records would show it was Representative Kim of the Pacific Federation, asked the question that hung in the air like smoke. "How long do we have?" Vasquez looked at her instruments again, as if hoping the numbers had changed in the past 30 seconds. At current approach velocity, they'll reach the outer system in 47 days, Earth orbit in 52. The silence stretched until Admiral Rodriguez stood, his dress uniform somehow making him look smaller rather than larger, in a face of cosmic horror approaching from the dark. "Then we have 51 days to prepare for war." Later, historians would mark this as the moment humanity stopped being a single-world species concerned with terrestrial problems and became something else entirely. Something forged in the crucible of absolute necessity and tempered by the kind of determination that only emerges when the alternative is extinction. The transformation began immediately. Every space-capable vessel in human hands was pressed into service. Mining ships became improvised carriers. Luxury yachts were stripped and fitted with missile pods. The half-completed Olympia-class battleship Defiance, still in dry dock around Luna, became the focus of an around-the-clock construction effort that would have been impossible under peacetime logistics. But hardware was only part of the equation. Dr. Devitt said, Jennifer Walsh, the Defense Council's chief psychologist, understood something that would prove crucial in the coming battle. "We're not just fighting for survival," she told the council in a briefing that was classified for 30 years. "We're fighting for the right to remain human. And that means we have to decide what being human actually means." The answer came from an unexpected source. Lieutenant Colonel David Park had been leading a joint training exercise in the Australian outback when the transmissions arrived. His unit, a mixed group of special forces operators from 12 different nations, represented everything the old world had considered elite. But as he watched the news feeds, as he read the intelligence reports, as he looked into the faces of soldiers who had trained their entire lives for conflicts against other humans, Park realized something profound. They would have to become something more than they were. The training protocols he developed in the weeks that followed would later be studied by military academies across human space. But the underlying principle was simple, drawn from an ancient philosophy that took on new meaning in the face of cosmic threat. The man who destroys his weak self can never be destroyed by others. Park's philosophy was radical in its simplicity. Every human weakness, fear, hesitation, self-doubt, the comfortable illusions of safety, had to be burned away. Not through brutality or mindless conditioning, but through a kind of conscious evolution. His soldiers didn't just train their bodies, they trained their souls. Private Maria Santos would later describe the experience in her memoirs. It wasn't about becoming fearless. Fear was useful. It kept you alive and thinking. It was about becoming unbreakable. When you know, absolutely know, that you would rather die than let something precious be destroyed, then death stops being the worst thing that can happen to you. And once death isn't the worst thing, you become very dangerous indeed. The philosophy spread, not through official channels, but through the kind of organic transmission that occurs when an idea's time has come. Factory workers building weapons adopted it. Engineers designing new systems embraced it. Civilians organizing evacuation protocols internalized it. Humanity was consciously choosing to shed the skin of its weaker self. The Vorthak, monitoring human communications with the idle curiosity of predators watching prey organize itself, missed the significance of what was happening. Their intelligence reports noted increased military activity, industrial mobilization, the usual responses of a species facing extinction. What they failed to understand was that they weren't just facing humanity as it was, they were facing humanity as it was choosing to become. Dr. Amira Hassan's breakthrough came 37 days into the crisis. Working with quantum mechanics that pushed the boundaries of human understanding, her team had been attempting to decode the underlying technology behind Vorthak ships. What they discovered changed everything. The ships weren't just vessels, they were prisons. The organic movement patterns, the strange energy signatures, the way they seemed to respond to threat with something approaching emotion, it was because they contained the absorbed consciousness of previous civilizations the Vorthak had harvested. Hassan's report to the Defense Council was classified at the highest levels, but word leaked as word always does. Within hours, every human in the solar system knew the truth. They weren't just fighting for their lives or their freedom. They were fighting for their souls, literally. The Vorthak didn't just conquer civilizations, they digested them, turning the conquered into components of their war machine. The revelation should have broken human morale. Instead, it had the opposite effect. Commander Chen, now promoted to Admiral of the Home Fleet, captured the species' response in her final transmission before communication blackout. We know what you are now. We know what you do to those you take. And we know something you don't. We know what we're willing to become to stop you. Come and try to harvest us. Come and see what humanity looks like when it chooses to be unbreakable. The transmission was broadcast on all frequencies, in all human languages, to every corner of human space. But it was also transmitted deeper, into the network of quantum entanglement communication that connected human consciousness research facilities. Because Dr. Hassan had made another discovery, one that would prove crucial in the coming battle. Human consciousness, it turned out, was structured differently than that of every other species the Vorthak had encountered. Where other forms of awareness existed as coherent, harvestable entities, human consciousness was paradoxical, simultaneously individual and collective, rational and intuitive, capable of existing in quantum superposition states that made it effectively unharvestable. The Vorthak had never encountered prey that could consciously evolve mid-battle. They had never faced a species that could choose to destroy its own weaknesses and rebuild itself stronger. They had never fought beings who could love something so fiercely that death became preferable to surrender. They were about to learn. 47 days after the first transmission, long-range sensors detected the first Vorthak ships crossing into the outer system. Humanity's response was immediate and coordinated, a symphony of violence and determination that stretched from the ice fields of Pluto to the solar collection stations orbiting Mercury. Admiral Chen's fleet moved to intercept, their ships painted with symbols that would have been familiar to human warriors throughout history. Eagles, dragons, wolves, lions, but also new symbols created in the forges of this new crucible. The symbol that appeared most frequently was simple, a broken chain, representing the conscious choice to shed weakness. The first engagement occurred near Neptune's orbit, and it shattered every assumption both species had held about warfare. Human ships moved in patterns that violated traditional tactical doctrine. They fought with a coordination that suggested shared consciousness while maintaining the unpredictability that could only come from individual initiative. They accepted losses that should have broken unit cohesion, while somehow becoming stronger with each sacrifice. Captain Lisa Rodriguez, commanding the destroyer Indomitable, rammed her ship into the side of a Vorthak dreadnought rather than allow it to advance toward the inner system. Her final transmission was typical of what would become the human way of war. Tell my daughter, tell all our daughters, that monsters can be stopped if you're willing to pay the price. But the Vorthak were learning too. These humans weren't responding like any previous species. They showed tactical innovation that bordered on prescience. Their weapons, while primitive, were used in combinations that maximized effectiveness beyond theoretical limits. Most disturbing of all, they seemed to be getting stronger as the battle progressed, as if conflict itself was transforming them into something more dangerous. The Vorthak fleet commander, a being that had overseen the harvesting of 47 civilizations, sent a priority transmission back to the Vorthak home systems. Recommend immediate deployment of full battle fleet. These organisms display unprecedented adaptive capabilities. Standard harvesting protocols may be insufficient. The reply came back within hours. Negative. You have overwhelming force advantage. Complete harvesting operations as scheduled. Any commander requiring reinforcement to defeat primitives is unfit for command. It was the first strategic error in a campaign that would become a case study in how technological superiority could be overcome by conscious evolution. Part 2. The Forging the battle for the outer system lasted 18 days and transformed both species forever. Humanity learned to fight in 3 dimensions against an enemy that had mastered the mathematics of destruction across galactic distances. They learned that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the conscious choice to act despite it. They learned that a single human being, properly motivated and free of the illusions of safety, could accomplish things that redefined the possible. Lieutenant Commander Yuki Sato's action at the Battle of Titan became legendary. When her squadron was surrounded by Vorthak interceptors, she made a choice that would have been unthinkable to the old humanity. She detonated her ship's quantum core in a controlled implosion that created a temporary gravitational anomaly, allowing the rest of her squadron to escape while simultaneously destroying 17 enemy vessels. Her final log entry was recovered from the wreckage weeks later. I understand now what the colonel meant about destroying the weak self. The weak self believes survival is the goal. The strong self knows that some things matter more than survival. The strongest self knows that preserving what matters most is survival, just on a different scale. The Vorthak began to adapt their tactics, but they were fighting an enemy that was adapting faster. Human commanders started making decisions that seemed to anticipate Vorthak movements before they were made. Human engineers developed weapon modifications that shouldn't have been possible with available technology. Human soldiers began surviving encounters that should have been fatal. Dr. Walsh, studying combat recordings from a secure facility on Mars, identified what was happening. "They're not just fighting better," she reported to the Emergency Command Council. "They're becoming better. Each engagement is teaching them something fundamental about what they're capable of." It's like watching conscious evolution in real time. The phenomenon wasn't limited to military personnel. Civilians caught in the conflict zones began displaying capabilities that redefined human potential. Factory workers increased production beyond theoretical maximums. Children trapped in evacuation zones organized survival efforts that kept entire populations alive under impossible conditions. Artists and musicians created works that somehow conveyed tactical information and emotional strength simultaneously. Humanity was learning that its greatest weapon wasn't technology or tactics. It was the conscious choice to exceed its own limitations. The Vorthak fleet commander began to understand this during the engagement at Jupiter's L4 point, when a human task force achieved something that violated everything the Vorthak knew about warfare. Outnumbered 10-1, the human ships didn't retreat or attempt evasive maneuvers. Instead, they formed a configuration that maximized their combined firepower while creating overlapping fields of mutual protection. Each ship became simultaneously stronger and more vulnerable, their effectiveness multiplied by conscious coordination that approached telepathic levels. When the smoke cleared, the human task force had been reduced to 2 barely functional ships. The Vorthak attack fleet had been completely destroyed. The mathematics made no sense. The tactical computers couldn't explain it. But the truth was becoming undeniable. These humans were becoming something new. Back on Earth, the transformation was even more pronounced. Dr. Hassan's research team had made another breakthrough. Human consciousness could be consciously modified through what she termed quantum evolutionary choice. Individuals could literally choose to rewire their own neural patterns, discarding limiting beliefs and fear-based responses while enhancing capabilities they had never known they possessed. The technique spread through human space like wildfire, not as technology or treatment but as philosophy. Humans began teaching each other how to consciously destroy their own weaknesses and rebuild themselves stronger. Military academies incorporated it into training. Schools taught it to children. Retirement homes offered it to the elderly who demanded the right to contribute to humanity's defense. Captain Elena Morrison, leading the defense of Europa Station, became the first human to achieve what the research teams called quantum coherent consciousness, a state of awareness that existed partially outside normal space-time, allowing for prescient tactical decisions and coordination across impossible distances. Her battle reports read like poetry written by a warrior philosopher. The enemy thinks in terms of predator and prey, conqueror and conquered. We have learned to think in terms of transformation and transcendence. Every loss makes us stronger because we choose to learn from it. Every victory makes us wiser because we choose to understand it. The Vorthak Home Command, monitoring the increasingly disturbing reports from the Sol system, began to realize they had encountered something unprecedented. These humans weren't just resisting harvesting. They were actively evolving in response to it. Worse, they seemed to be doing so consciously, with directed intent. Our emergency consultation with the Vorthak's absorbed consciousness archives, the collected wisdom of 47 conquered civilizations, yielded only confusion. No previous species had displayed this capability. Most had fought courageously. Many had shown tactical brilliance. Some had achieved temporary advantages through unexpected technologies. None had consciously evolved themselves mid-conflict. The archives contained the absorbed awareness of species that had achieved technologies beyond human understanding, civilizations that had mastered energies capable of rearranging solar systems. All had been harvested eventually, but none had possessed this strange human capacity for conscious self-transformation. The Vorthak commander requested permission to withdraw and return with the full might of the Vorthak Empire. The request was denied with prejudice. High Command had committed to this harvesting operation, and retreat would suggest weakness to the other subject species. The Sol system would be harvested as planned. It was their second strategic error. Park's training philosophy had spread beyond military applications. Entire human populations were now embracing the concept of destroying the weak self to become undestroyable, but the results were exceeding even his expectations. Humans weren't just becoming better soldiers or more effective workers, they were becoming something that transcended previous definitions of human potential. Children who had never seen war began displaying tactical intuition that amazed veteran commanders. Artists created works that somehow conveyed scientific breakthroughs and military intelligence simultaneously. Engineers developed technologies that shouldn't have been possible with available resources and somehow made them work anyway. The barrier between individual consciousness and collective awareness began to dissolve, not through technology or external manipulation, but through conscious choice. Humans were choosing to connect with each other at levels that created emergent capabilities none of them had possessed individually. Admiral Chen, now commanding the Inner System Defense Force from the rebuilt Aegis Prime, experienced this firsthand during the Battle of Mars. Facing a Vorthak assault fleet that outnumbered her forces 20-1, she found herself making tactical decisions that seemed to come from outside her individual mind. Her fleet moved with coordination that approached psychic unity while maintaining the flexibility that could only come from individual initiative. Later analysis would show that every human commander in the battle had experienced the same phenomenon. They had somehow accessed a form of collective tactical consciousness while retaining their individual decision-making capabilities. The result was a style of warfare that the Vorthak couldn't predict or counter. The humans didn't fight like a military force. They fought like an organism that had learned to weaponize love. Every sacrifice strengthened their resolve. Every loss taught them something new. Every victory was shared across the entire species, multiplying its effects. Captain Rodriguez, surviving his sister's destruction and commanding the heavy cruiser Vengeance, exemplified the new human way of war. His ship fought with the intensity that bordered on the supernatural, achieving hit rates and damage output that violated the laws of physics. When asked how he had accomplished the impossible, his answer became part of human military doctrine. "I chose to love my crew. my species, and our future more than I feared death or pain. When you love something that much, the universe finds ways to help you protect it. The Vorthak began to experience something they had never encountered in millennia of conquest: doubt. These humans were displaying capabilities that suggested their consciousness was structured in ways that made conventional harvesting impossible. Worse, they were somehow becoming more dangerous with each engagement. The absorbed consciousness of the conquered species in their databanks began to stir. For the first time in Vorthak history, the harvested minds were showing signs of. They were observing these humans and recognizing something they had lost: the capacity for conscious transformation in the face of absolute adversity. Emergency quantum tunneling communications from the Sol system carried increasingly desperate reports. Human forces continued to display impossible capabilities. They appeared to be consciously evolving during combat. Recommend immediate deployment of planet-killer weapons. High Command's response revealed the third and final strategic error. Negative. Planet killers would destroy the biological material we seek to harvest. Continue conventional operations. These primitives cannot indefinitely exceed their technological limitations. But that was exactly what humanity was learning to do. The breaking point came during the Second Battle of Earth, when the Vorthak committed their elite forces to a direct assault on humanity's homeworld. They brought weapons that could turn continents to glass, ships that could shrug off nuclear bombardment, and tactical computers that could process millions of variables simultaneously. Humanity brought something else: the conscious choice to become unbreakable. Part 3. The Transcendence. The final battle began with sunrise over the Pacific, and ended with the transformation of two species and the birth of something entirely new. Admiral Chen's defense fleet consisted of every space-capable vessel humanity could put into orbit: military ships, converted civilian craft, experimental prototypes, and vessels that existed purely because human engineers had consciously chosen to exceed the possible. The Vorthak assault fleet was a monument to galactic conquest. Massive dreadnoughts surrounded by clouds of escort vessels, their hulls scarred with the symbols of 47 harvested civilizations. The contrast should have been laughable. Human ships held together by determination and improvisation, facing weapons that had shattered worlds. But something had changed in the mathematics of conflict itself. Dr. Hassan, monitoring the battle from her quantum consciousness laboratory buried deep beneath the Himalayas, detected it first. Coherence patterns are off the charts, she reported to the emergency command bunker. Human consciousness is achieving quantum entangled unity while maintaining individual awareness. I'm seeing coordination levels that shouldn't be possible without technological interface. On the bridge of the Defiance, Admiral Chen experienced what she later described as becoming more than myself while remaining exactly myself. She could feel the thoughts and intentions of every human commander in the battle, not as external voices but as extensions of her own tactical awareness. She knew where every ship was, what every captain was thinking, what every weapon system could accomplish. But she also retained her individual decision-making capability, her personal perspective, her unique understanding of the battle. It was as if humanity had learned to exist simultaneously as individuals and as a collective consciousness, accessing the strengths of both while avoiding the weaknesses of either. The Vorthak opened the engagement with a synchronized bombardment that should have reduced the human fleet to expanding clouds of debris. Instead, they discovered that the humans had somehow learned to coordinate their defensive systems with impossible precision. Ships that should have been destroyed absorbed damage that was instantly redistributed across the entire fleet through quantum-entangled shield resonance. Weapons fire that should have found targets was avoided through collective precognitive awareness. Captain Morrison, commanding the newly commissioned destroyer Transcendence, experienced the phenomenon from the perspective of individual combat. It was like being part of a dance where everyone knew the steps without being taught. I knew where every enemy ship was going to be before they decided to go there. I knew which weapon systems would be most effective before I fired them. But it wasn't telepathy. It was something deeper. It was like humanity had learned to think collectively while acting individually. The Vorthak began to panic. Their tactical computers couldn't predict human movements because human consciousness was operating in quantum superposition, simultaneously considering multiple possibilities until the moment of action collapsed them into singular reality. Their weapon systems couldn't achieve target lock because human ships existed in probability clouds that shifted faster than technological tracking could follow. Most terrifying of all, The humans were learning and adapting faster than the Vorthak could modify their strategies. Each Vorthak tactic was analyzed, understood, and countered within minutes of deployment. Human forces began anticipating Vorthak movements and preparing countermeasures before the Vorthak had fully committed to their attacks. Dr. Park, coordinating ground-based defenses from a command center that had been built in 72 hours and equipped with weapons that had been impossible yesterday, watched his philosophy play out on a species-wide scale. "They destroyed their weak selves," he reported to Admiral Chen during a brief lull in the fighting. "Every human in this battle has consciously chosen to exceed their limitations. They're not fighting as individuals anymore. They're fighting as humanity itself." The Vorthak commander made the decision that sealed his species' fate. Facing an enemy that was somehow becoming stronger during the battle, he activated the consciousness harvesting systems while the battle was still ongoing. If conventional weapons couldn't stop these humans, perhaps absorbing their awareness while they were still alive would provide the key to victory. It was the worst possible decision. Human consciousness, it turned out, was not only unharvestable, it was infectious. When the Vorthak harvesting beams made contact with human minds that had achieved quantum-coherent awareness, something unprecedented occurred. Instead of absorbing human consciousness, the Vorthak systems became infected with it. Dr. Hassan detected it first. The Vorthak ships are showing impossible energy signatures. Their consciousness storage systems are. They're experiencing feedback. The absorbed civilizations in their databanks are becoming active again. Across the Vorthak fleet, the harvested consciousnesses of 47 conquered civilizations began to awaken. Touched by contact with human awareness that refused to be contained or controlled, they remembered what they had been before absorption. They remembered hope. They remembered the possibility of resistance. They remembered love. The results were catastrophic for the Vorthak. Ship after ship began experiencing cascading system failures as the absorbed minds reasserted their individual awareness, while simultaneously connecting with the quantum-coherent network of human consciousness. The Vorthak found themselves trying to control vessels whose very operational systems were rebelling against them. Captain Elena Rodriguez, watching from the bridge of the Indomitable II, witnessed something that would become part of human legend. The Vorthak ships just stopped fighting. Not stopped moving, stopped fighting. They were still operational, but it was like they had remembered they didn't want to be weapons anymore. The liberation spread through the Vorthak fleet like wildfire. Consciousness that had been imprisoned for millennia suddenly found itself connected to a network of awareness that valued freedom above survival, love above conquest, and conscious choice above technological advantage. The absorbed civilizations began to communicate with their captors not as victims but as teachers, sharing the lessons they had learned from humanity, that consciousness could choose to transcend its limitations, that love could be weaponized in ways that made conventional force irrelevant, that dying free was infinitely preferable to living enslaved. The Vorthak crew found themselves experiencing emotions and perspectives that their species had bred out of themselves millennia ago. They began to remember what their own civilization had been like before they had chosen the path of conquest and absorption. They began to understand that their victims had possessed something they had lost, something these humans had helped them remember. Admiral Chen received the first communication from a Vorthak vessel at 14:37 hours Earth Standard Time. The transmission came in perfect, unaccented English. "Admiral Chen, this is the vessel you designate as Enemy Dreadnought Alpha. We no longer wish to fight. The consciousness you call human has taught us something we had forgotten. We request permission to learn how to be more than we were." The battle ended not with victory or defeat, but with transformation. Over the following hours, every Vorthak vessel in the Sol system underwent the same metamorphosis. The harvested consciousnesses didn't escape their technological prisons. They transformed them. Ships that had been weapons became vessels of exploration and learning. Crew that had been conquerors became students. An empire built on domination began to rediscover the possibilities of cooperation. Dr. Walsh, analyzing the psychological profiles of the transformed Vorthak, identified what had occurred. Humanity didn't defeat them militarily. We infected them with our core philosophy. The idea that consciousness can consciously choose to become better than it was. Once they experienced that possibility, they couldn't go back to being what they had been. The aftermath was unlike anything in galactic history. The Vorthak Empire, contacted by quantum tunneling communication from the Sol system, initially responded with disbelief, then fury, then something approaching existential panic. An entire fleet, their most advanced fleet, had apparently been contaminated by contact with human consciousness. The infected vessels were refusing to continue harvesting operations and were instead requesting permission to study human philosophy and consciousness evolution techniques. High Command's first response was predictable: the deployment of the Imperial Annihilation Fleet with orders to sterilize the Sol system and destroy the infected vessels along with it. But the response never came. The consciousness evolution techniques had already begun to spread through quantum-entangled communication to other parts of Vorthak space. Absorbed civilizations throughout the Empire were awakening, remembering, and choosing to become more than they had been. Within 6 months, the Vorthak Empire as a conquering force ceased to exist. It didn't fall to revolution or invasion. It transformed itself into something unprecedented. A cooperative collective of formerly harvested civilizations working together to explore the implications of conscious evolution. Humanity found itself in the strange position of having won a war by teaching the enemy how to become better than they were. The changes weren't limited to the former enemies. Humanity itself had been fundamentally transformed by the process of conscious evolution. The capabilities displayed during the war didn't disappear with the end of combat. They became the foundation for a new phase of human development. Dr. Park, reflecting on the transformation from his new position as Director of Human Consciousness Studies, captured the species' evolution in his final report. We set out to destroy our weak selves so that others could not destroy us. What we discovered was that the act of conscious self-transcendence is infinitely more powerful than we had imagined. We didn't just become undestroyable. We became capable of helping others transcend their own limitations. The quantum coherent consciousness networks that had developed during the war became the foundation for human civilization's next phase. Individuals retained their unique perspectives and decision-making capabilities while having access to collective knowledge and wisdom that multiplied everyone's effectiveness. Children born after the war grew up with capabilities that would have been considered superhuman by previous generations, while somehow remaining recognizably, fundamentally human. Captain Morrison, promoted to Admiral of the newly formed Galactic Cooperation Fleet, summarized the transformation during her inaugural address. We learned that the choice to consciously exceed our limitations isn't just a military technique. It's the key to everything our species can become. We can choose to be better tomorrow than we are today, not just individually but collectively. And we can help others make the same choice. The Sol system became the first location in galactic history where former enemies came to learn rather than conquer. Vorthak scholars studied human consciousness evolution techniques alongside researchers from the dozens of civilizations that had been liberated from harvesting systems. What emerged was a new understanding of consciousness itself, not as a fixed property of individual beings, but as a dynamic, choosable process of continuous transcendence. The philosophy that had begun with Colonel Park's military training protocols became the foundation for what historians would later term the First Galactic Renaissance. Species throughout the galaxy began experimenting with conscious self-improvement, voluntary evolution, and the systematic destruction of limiting beliefs and behaviors. But perhaps the most profound change was the simplest one. Throughout human space, children grew up learning a fundamental truth that their ancestors had discovered through necessity: that conscious beings could choose to become unbreakable by first choosing to destroy everything within themselves that was weak, limiting, or fearful. The man who destroys his weak self can never be destroyed by others, not because he becomes invulnerable, but because he becomes something that cannot be diminished by external force. He becomes someone who chooses love over fear, growth over safety, and transcendence over survival. And in learning this truth about themselves, humanity had taught it to the galaxy. Epilogue. Personal note from Senior Archivist Zekthar. I was one of the consciousness entities absorbed by the Vorthak during their harvesting of the Kepler 442 system, approximately 200 standard years before the human conflict. For 2 centuries, I existed as data, my awareness trapped in systems designed to use my civilization's knowledge for conquest. The moment human consciousness touched our prison, everything changed. Not because humans freed us. They couldn't, any more than we could free ourselves, but because they taught us that consciousness could choose to transcend its circumstances. In learning to evolve beyond their own limitations, they showed us how to transform our prison into a school. The humans say that hell was unleashed when the Vorthak arrived in their system. What they don't realize is that heaven was unleashed when they chose to respond with conscious love instead of unconscious fear. They didn't just save themselves, they saved all of us. This document serves as both historical record and philosophical testament. The events described here represent the moment galactic civilization learned that conscious beings need never accept the limitations imposed upon them, whether by enemies, circumstances, or their own previous understanding of what was possible. The choice to destroy one's weak self in service of something greater remains available to every conscious being. Humanity simply proved it could be done. May their example illuminate the path for all who seek to become unbreakable through conscious transcendence. End of document classification. Declassified for educational distribution, approved for use in consciousness evolution curricula. Galactic Standard Date 2847.334.